My name is Marlow Trasker, and I should have seen it coming when my wife decided to give that toast at our 20th anniversary party. But let me back up a minute, because the devil's always in the details, and brother, there were plenty of devils dancing that night at Ashwood Hall. Ashwood, New York isn't the kind of place that makes it onto postcards. It's one of those small industrial cities that got sucker punched by the recession and never quite got back up. Half the downtown is boarded up. The other half is hanging on by its fingernails. The rich folks live up on Maple Hill in their crumbling Victorian mansions, pretending the paint isn't peeling and the foundations aren't shifting. The rest of us make do in the neighborhoods down by the river, where the houses are small but honest, and nobody pretends to be something they're not. I run Trasker's Custom Garage on the south side, fixing up classic muscle cars for guys who remember when America built things to last. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and I'm good at it. My hands are permanently stained with motor oil, and I've got scars on my knuckles from 20 years of wrestling with stubborn bolts and sharp metal edges. I used to box back in the day, down at Marty Fenn's gym. Never went pro, but I learned how to take a punch and how to give one back twice as hard. Vanna, my wife, she's always been different. Ambitious in a way that made her stand out in Ashwood like a diamond in a coal pile. She clawed her way up from a secretary job at First National Bank to senior vice president, and she never let anyone forget it. Designer suits, perfect makeup, the kind of smile that could charm money out of a miser's pocket. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, but there was always something calculating behind those green eyes, like she was constantly adding up the value of everything around her. My younger brother Rhett was the golden boy of the family, or at least he thought he was. 2 years younger than me, but he always acted like he was the older one. Handsome in that smooth politician kind of way, with perfect teeth and hair that never seemed to get messed up. He'd tried his hand at a dozen different business ventures over the years, each one failing more spectacularly than the last. Real estate, importing, some kind of cryptocurrency thing that I never understood, but he had charm. I'll give him that. The kind of guy who could talk his way into anything and out of trouble just as easy. Our daughter Darla was 19, home from college for the party. She'd inherited her mother's looks and her uncle's smooth tongue, plus a social media addiction that would make a teenager jealous. Everything was content to her. Every moment a potential post. She had this way of looking at me sometimes, like I was some embarrassing relic from a bygone era. The anniversary party was Vanna's idea, of course. 20 years of marriage, she said, deserved a proper celebration. She booked Ashwood Hall, the fanciest venue in town, with its crystal chandeliers and mahogany panels that had seen better decades. The guest list was mostly her people from the bank, a few neighbors, some family. My crowd was smaller. Marty from the gym, a couple of the guys from the garage, some old boxing buddies who'd managed to stay out of jail or the grave. I should have known something was wrong when Vanna spent 3 hours getting ready, trying on 4 different dresses before settling on a black number that probably cost more than most people make in a month. She kept checking her phone, typing quick messages, and then deleting them. When I asked who she was texting, she just smiled that calculating smile and said it was work stuff. The party started normal enough. Good food, decent band, people mingling and making small talk about the weather and the local high school football team's chances this season. I played the gracious host, shaking hands and accepting congratulations like I actually believed this marriage was something worth celebrating. Vanna worked the room like the professional she was, charming everyone with stories about our early days and jokes about my grease-stained work clothes. Then came the dancing. The band struck up "The Way You Look Tonight," our old song from way back when we were young and stupid and thought love conquered everything. I held out my hand to Vanna, expecting our traditional first dance, the one we'd done at our actual wedding 20 years ago. But Vanna stepped back, that smile turning sharp around the edges. She picked up the microphone from the bandleader, and the music stopped like someone had pulled the plug on the whole world. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 20 years of marriage. But before we continue, I have something I need to say. Something I should have said a long time ago." My gut started churning like I'd swallowed broken glass. Every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of marriage, 15 years of boxing, and 45 years of living in a world that would chew you up and spit you out if you weren't paying attention, was screaming that this was about to go very, very wrong. "This dance," Vanna continued, her eyes scanning the crowd but somehow avoiding mine, "is for the man I've secretly loved for 10 years, the man who understands me in ways my husband never could, the man who represents everything I want for my future." The room went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in people's drinks. I stood there like an idiot, my hand still extended, while my wife walked past me like I was invisible. She walked straight to my brother Rhett, who was standing by the bar with a look on his face that was half surprise, half guilt, and all smug satisfaction. They started dancing, right there in front of God and everybody, while I stood in the middle of that dance floor like a scarecrow in a cornfield. The crowd didn't know whether to applaud, gasp, or run for the exits. Most of them just stood there with their mouths hanging open, probably already composing the text messages they'd send as soon as they got to their cars. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band that's been stretched too far for too long. I walked over to where Vanna's father was standing, his face pale as old cheese, and asked him one simple question. "Did you tell her about the Ashwood Trust?" The old man went even paler, if that was possible. See, there was a little family secret that Vanna had never bothered to learn about. My grandfather had set up a trust fund years ago, back when the Traskers actually had money. It wasn't huge, but it was substantial enough to matter. The catch was, it could only be accessed by direct male descendants of the Trasker line, and only with the approval of the eldest living male heir. That would be me. Rhett had been trying to get his hands on that money for years, but he needed my signature to make it happen. Apparently, he'd found another way to get what he wanted. While Vanna and Rhett swayed to the music, I pulled out my phone and activated a little contingency plan I'd set up years ago. See, when you're married to someone as ambitious as Vanna, you learn to cover your bases. I'd been monitoring our joint accounts for months, watching as money slowly disappeared in small amounts that she probably thought I wouldn't notice. Tonight, I transferred every penny back to accounts she couldn't touch, and then I sent a little message to her bridesmaids about how she'd been draining our savings to fund her new lifestyle. Then I did something that probably wasn't entirely legal, but felt absolutely necessary. I sent a text to the venue manager claiming there was a gas leak and the building needed to be secured until further notice. Within minutes, the exits were locked and people were starting to panic. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I walked over to the band, took the microphone from the lead singer, and tapped it a couple of times to make sure it was working. The feedback screeched through the room like a wounded animal, and everyone turned to look at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying that same calm tone I used when explaining to customers why their classic Camaro was going to cost twice what they thought to restore. "Before you all rush home to spread the news about tonight's entertainment, I thought you might like to know the rest of the story." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. Amazing what you can pick up with modern technology, especially when people think they're having private conversations in your own house. This is a recording I made last Tuesday night, when my loving wife and devoted brother thought I was working late at the garage. I pressed play, and Vanna's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakable. "We just need to be patient a little longer, Rhett. Once I get access to the trust fund, we can leave this pathetic little town behind and start fresh somewhere that appreciates people like us." And Rhett's response: "I'm tired of watching you pretend to love that grease monkey. He's never been good enough for you, Vanna. He's never been good enough for anything." The room exploded. Not literally, of course, but the noise was incredible. People shouting, gasping, a few of the women crying. Vanna stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her face cycling through about 6 different emotions in the space of 10 seconds. Rhett looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest table and disappear. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. "Now," I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter. "I know you're all eager to get home and start making phone calls, but the exits are locked for safety reasons. So why don't we all just stay here and get the whole story out in the open? After all, we're family, right?" The fallout from that night spread through Ashwood faster than gossip at a church social. By morning, everyone in town knew that Vanna Trasker had publicly humiliated her husband at their anniversary party, and that the whole thing had been some kind of elaborate scheme involving family money and her brother-in-law. I spent the next few days at the garage keeping my hands busy and my mind occupied. Work has always been my therapy. There's something honest about fixing engines. You can see what's broken, you know what needs to be done, and when you're finished, everything works the way it's supposed to. Unlike marriages, apparently. The guys at the garage tried to be supportive in their own way. Tommy Brennan, who'd been working for me for about 5 years, kept bringing me coffee and making awkward small talk about carburetor rebuilds and transmission fluid. Eddie Martinez, my newest hire, just stayed out of my way and focused on his work. Smart kid. But it was Marty Fenn who really understood what I was going through. Marty had been running the Ashwood Boxing and Social Club for 30 years, and he'd seen every kind of human drama you could imagine. He'd been my trainer back when I thought I might make something of myself in the ring, and he'd stayed a friend even after I hung up the gloves to focus on the garage. "You look like hammered crap," Marty said when I showed up at the gym 3 days after the party. He was working with a young heavyweight, teaching him how to keep his guard up and his feet moving. The kid had potential, but he was making the same mistakes I'd made at his age, too eager, not enough patience. "Feel worse than I look," I replied, wrapping my hands and heading for the heavy bag. Sometimes you need to hit something, and a bag is better than a person, legally speaking. "Heard about the party," Marty said, dismissing the young fighter with a nod. "Whole town's talking about it. Vanna always was too good for her own good, if you know what I mean." I started working the bag, throwing combinations that came back to me like muscle memory. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. The rhythm was soothing, meditative almost. Each punch carried a little bit of the anger and humiliation I'd been carrying around since that night. "Thing is," I said between combinations, "I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. Late nights at the office, new clothes, checking her phone every 5 minutes. I just didn't want to believe it." "Course you didn't," Marty said. "Nobody wants to believe their wife's been playing them for a fool. But here's the thing, Marlow. You got 2 choices now. You can curl up in a corner and feel sorry for yourself, or you can do something about it." "What do you mean?" Marty's grin was sharp as broken glass. "I mean, don't get mad, get even, and don't get caught." That afternoon, I had an unexpected visitor at the garage. Darla showed up in her little red convertible, the one Vanna had bought her for her 18th birthday. She was dressed in designer jeans and a top that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, as usual. "Hi, Dad," she said, not looking up from her screen. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About this whole situation with Mom and Uncle Rhett. It's really embarrassing, you know? All my friends are seeing the posts about it online. Someone recorded the whole thing and put it on TikTok. It has like 50,000 views already." I wiped my hands on a shop rag and really looked at my daughter for the first time in months. When had she gotten so cold? So calculating? She had her mother's eyes, I realized, always adding up the value of everything around her. "I'm sorry you're embarrassed," I said, "but I'm not the one who caused this situation." "Yeah, but you're not making it any better," she shot back. "Mom says you locked everyone in the building and made some kind of crazy threats. She's talking about getting a restraining order." "Your mother can talk about whatever she wants, but she might want to think twice about involving lawyers, considering what they might find if they start digging into her finances." Darla finally looked up from her phone, and I saw something in her expression that made my chest tighten. It was pity. My own daughter was looking at me like I was some pathetic old man who didn't understand how the world worked. "Dad," she said, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when they are explaining something to a child, "you need to accept that Mom has moved on. She's not happy in this marriage, and she hasn't been for a long time. Maybe it's better for everyone if you just let her go." "Let her go?" I repeated. "Darla, she's been stealing money from our joint accounts. She's been having an affair with my brother. She humiliated me in front of half the town, and you think I should just let her go?" "I think you should stop being so dramatic about everything. People get divorced all the time. It's not the end of the world." That's when I realized that I'd lost more than just my wife. I'd lost my daughter, too, somewhere along the way. Maybe she'd been slipping away for years, and I'd been too busy working and trying to be a good provider to notice. Or maybe Vanna had been poisoning her against me, drop by drop, conversation by conversation. "You're right," I said finally. "People do get divorced all the time, but they don't usually do it by publicly humiliating their spouse and stealing their money." Darla shrugged, already turning back to her phone. "Whatever, Dad. Just try not to make this any weirder than it already is, okay?" After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the walls covered with photos of restored cars and boxing matches from my younger days. I thought about what Marty had said about getting even, and I thought about the look of pity in my daughter's eyes. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. If Vanna and Rhett wanted to play games, I'd play along, but I'd play by my own rules, and I'd play to win. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Jim Morrison. Not the rock star, just a guy who'd grown up 3 blocks away from me and understood how things worked in Ashwood. Jim had handled my business contracts for years, and he knew where all the financial bodies were buried. "Marlow," he said when I walked into his office that evening. "I heard about the party. I'm sorry, man. That's rough." "Thanks, Jim, but I'm not here for sympathy. I need to know exactly what my legal options are, and I need to know how to protect myself." We spent 2 hours going over everything: the joint accounts, the house, the business, the trust fund that Rhett had been so eager to get his hands on. Jim explained the divorce process, property division, and what I could expect if things got ugly, which they would. "The good news," Jim said, "is that you've been smart about keeping your business assets separate. The garage is yours, free and clear. The bad news is that she's got a claim on half of everything else, including the house." What about the money she's been taking from our accounts? That's trickier. If you can prove she was moving money without your knowledge, that's one thing. But if she can claim it was for legitimate household expenses, or that you gave her permission, it gets complicated. And the trust fund? Jim smiled for the first time that evening. That's where things get interesting. The way your grandfather set it up, she has no claim on that money at all. It's yours, and yours alone. If Rhett thought he was going to get his hands on it by convincing her to leave you, he's in for a nasty surprise. I left Jim's office feeling better than I had in days. Knowledge is power, and now I had both. Vanna and Rhett thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, I got a call from Cleo Rivington, Vanna's best friend from work. Cleo was one of those women who always seemed to be in the middle of other people's drama, offering advice and support while somehow never having any problems of her own. She was attractive in a sharp, predatory way, with short blonde hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Marlow," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I just wanted to call and tell you how sorry I am about everything that's happened. Vanna is just devastated about how things went at the party." "I'm sure she is," I said. "She asked me to call you because she's afraid to talk to you directly. She's worried you might do something impulsive." "Impulsive like what?" "Well, like locking everyone in a building and making threats. She's genuinely scared, Marlow. Maybe you should think about talking to someone, getting some help dealing with your anger." I almost laughed. Here was Cleo, calling to tell me that my cheating wife was afraid of me, while she was probably sitting in some restaurant with Rhett, planning their next move. "Tell Vanna she doesn't need to be afraid of me," I said. "I'm not going to hurt anyone. I'm just going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people they're dealing with." "What does that mean?" "It means Ashwood is a small town, Cleo. People talk. And sometimes they talk about things that certain people would prefer to keep private." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Cleo spoke again, her voice had lost some of its fake sweetness. "Marlow, I think you should be very careful about what you say and do in the next few weeks. Vanna has friends, important friends, people who could make life very difficult for you if they wanted to." "Is that a threat, Cleo?" "It's friendly advice, from someone who cares about what happens to you." After she hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in days. If Cleo was calling to make threats, it meant they were scared. And if they were scared, it meant I was doing something right. That evening, I drove over to Rhett's apartment complex on the other side of town. He lived in one of those new developments that tried to look upscale but just ended up looking cheap and temporary. All vinyl siding and fake shutters with tiny lawns and parking spaces barely big enough for a compact car. His precious Mustang was parked in its usual spot, a 1967 fastback that he'd restored himself. I had to admit, he'd done good work on it. The paint was perfect, the chrome gleamed, and the engine purred like a contented cat. It was probably the only thing Rhett had ever finished in his life. I didn't do anything to the car that night. I just stood there looking at it, thinking about how much it meant to him, how proud he was of that machine, how he'd spent hours working on every detail. It was his prized possession, his baby, his claim to mechanical respectability in a family of gearheads. But as I stood there in the parking lot, I started thinking about other things too, about how easy it would be to ruin something that someone cared about, how much damage you could do with just a few simple tools and a little bit of knowledge about how things worked. I was still thinking about it when I got home to find Vanna waiting for me in the kitchen. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a sweater, and she'd washed off most of her makeup. She looked younger, more like the woman I'd married 20 years ago, but her eyes were still calculating, still adding up the angles. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm listening." "This has gotten out of hand, Marlow. The whole town is talking about us. Darla's embarrassed, my parents are upset, and people at work are starting to ask questions. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we know." She sighed, running her hands through her hair. "I know you're hurt, and I'm sorry about that, but we both know this marriage has been over for a long time. We've just been going through the motions." "Have we?" "Because I thought we were building a life together. I thought we were partners." "We were, for a while. But people change, Marlow. I've changed. I want different things now." "You want my brother." "I want someone who understands my ambitions. Someone who wants more out of life than fixing old cars and drinking with the same group of friends every weekend." There it was, finally. The truth, or at least her version of it. I wasn't good enough for her anymore. I was too small, too simple, too satisfied with the life we'd built together. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "I want a divorce. A quiet, civilized divorce where we divide everything fairly and move on with our lives. And Rhett? What about him? Is he part of this civilized future you're planning? She looked me straight in the eye, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret, but it passed quickly, replaced by that familiar calculating expression. Yes, she said. He is. I nodded slowly, like I was considering her proposal, like I was the kind of man who would just roll over and let her walk away with half of everything I'd worked for, plus my brother and my dignity. Okay, I said finally, but I have one condition. What? I want you and Rhett to stay away from the trust fund. That money belongs to the Trasker family, and neither of you are going to see a penny of it. Her mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. So that's what this was really about. Not love, not compatibility, not growing apart. Money. It was always about money with Vanna. Fine, she said. Keep your precious trust fund. I don't need it. Good. I'm glad we understand each other. She stood up to leave, then turned back to me with that calculating smile. You know, Marlow, this could be a good thing for both of us, a chance to start fresh, find people who really appreciate us. You're probably right, I said. But Vanna, there's one more thing you should know. What's that? I lied. I'm not going to make this easy for you. I'm not going to be civilized. And I'm sure as heck not going to let you and Rhett ride off into the sunset with my money and my dignity. The smile disappeared from her face like I'd slapped it off. What does that mean? It means you wanted to play games, so we're going to play games. But we're going to play by my rules now. She stood there for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen, and I heard her car start up in the driveway. I sat alone in my kitchen, listening to the silence of my empty house, and I started planning my next move. If Vanna wanted a war, she'd get one. But she was about to learn something that 20 years of marriage should have taught her already. I might not be the smartest man in Ashwood, but I was definitely the most stubborn. And when a stubborn man decides to fight back, there's no telling how far he'll go to win. The next few weeks were like living in a fishbowl filled with piranhas. Everywhere I went in Ashwood, people stared, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, and some with the kind of gleeful anticipation you see on faces at a car wreck. The story of our anniversary party had taken on a life of its own, growing and mutating with each telling until it barely resembled what had actually happened. At the grocery store, conversation stopped when I walked down the aisles. At the gas station, the clerk couldn't make eye contact. Even at Marty's gym, where I'd been going for 15 years, there was an uncomfortable tension that hadn't been there before. I was no longer just Marlow Trasker, garage owner, and former boxer. I was Marlow Trasker, the guy whose wife left him for his own brother in front of half the town. But the worst part was Darla's reaction to everything. 3 days after my conversation with Vanna, I got a notification on my phone that someone had tagged me in a social media post. I don't usually pay attention to that stuff, but something made me look. It was a TikTok video that Darla had made, sitting in her dorm room with perfect lighting and that fake casual pose that young people seem to master instinctively. The caption read, "When your dad is having a midlife crisis and your whole family becomes a meme." In the video, she talked about how toxic masculinity and controlling behavior were ruining her family, and how proud she was of her mother for finally standing up for herself. She never mentioned my name directly, but everyone who watched it would know exactly who she was talking about. The video had over 10,000 views and hundreds of comments, most of them from her college friends offering support and making jokes about boomer dads who couldn't handle strong women. I stared at that video for a long time, watching my own daughter throw me under the bus for social media points. She'd reduced 20 years of marriage, 20 years of me working 60-hour weeks to pay for her private school and her car and her college tuition, into a convenient narrative about female empowerment and male fragility. That's when I realized that being the good guy wasn't working out so well for me. I'd spent my whole life trying to do the right thing, work hard, provide for my family, be honest in my business dealings, treat people with respect. And where had it gotten me? My wife was cheating with my brother, my daughter was mocking me online, and half the town was treating me like either a victim or a joke. Marty had been right. It was time to stop getting mad and start getting even. I started small. Darla's college tuition was due in 2 weeks, and guess who had been paying for it? I called the financial aid office and explained that due to changing family circumstances, I would no longer be able to contribute to my daughter's education. They were very understanding and helpful, explaining the process for student loans and work-study programs. Then I called the insurance company and removed Darla from our family plan. She was 19, technically an adult, and if she wanted to be independent enough to mock her father on social media, she could be independent enough to handle her own health insurance. Finally, I called the phone company and had her removed from our family plan. Her phone would be shut off by the end of the week unless she set up her own account. The call came 2 days later, right in the middle of a busy afternoon at the garage. I was elbow deep in the engine compartment of a 1969 Camaro when my phone rang. "Dad, what the heck?" Darla's voice was shrill with panic. "They're saying my tuition payment was canceled, and my phone is going to get shut off." "That's right," I said calmly, not looking up from the engine. "You can't do that. I'm in the middle of the semester." "I can, and I did. You're an adult, Darla. You made that very clear in your little video. Adults pay their own bills." "That video wasn't about you specifically." "Sure it was, and that's fine. You have every right to express your opinions. But actions have consequences, and one of the consequences of publicly mocking your father is that your father might decide to stop paying for your lifestyle." There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its entitled edge. "Dad, please. I can't afford tuition on my own, and Mom can't help right now because of the divorce and everything." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to make me the villain in your little social media drama." "I'll take the video down." "Too late for that. It's already been shared and copied. The internet is forever, remember?" She started crying then, the kind of manipulative sobbing that had worked on me when she was 5 years old, but I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to figure out how to pay your own way, just like millions of other college students do every year. You're going to learn what it means to work for something instead of having it handed to you. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you'll learn not to bite the hand that feeds you." I hung up before she could respond. That evening, Vanna showed up at the garage just as I was closing up. She was furious, her carefully composed mask completely gone. "How dare you cut off Darla's tuition?" she shouted before she was even out of her car. "She's your daughter." "She's also an adult who made a choice," I replied, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "She chose to publicly humiliate her father for internet points. Now she gets to live with the consequences." "She's just a kid, Marlow. She doesn't understand what she's doing." "She's 19 years old, Vanna. When you were 19, you were working 2 jobs and putting yourself through business school. Don't tell me she doesn't understand consequences." Vanna stepped closer, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. Apparently her new life with Rhett wasn't going as smoothly as she'd planned. "Fine," she said. "You want to punish me? Punish me, but don't take it out on Darla." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not rewarding bad behavior anymore. There's a difference." "What do you want, Marlow? What will it take for you to act like a decent human being?" I looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something cold settle in my chest. She was still beautiful, still charming when she wanted to be, but I could see through all of that now, down to the calculating, selfish person she'd always been underneath. "I want you to understand something," I said quietly. "For 20 years, I've been the decent human being in this relationship. I worked my butt off to give you and Darla everything you wanted. I supported your career, I put up with your moods, I ignored your little flirtations and your growing dissatisfaction with our life together. I was patient and understanding and forgiving, right up until the moment you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. Marlow, I'm not finished. You want to know what I want? I want you to understand that the decent human being is gone. You and Rhett and Darla, you've made it very clear that decency is for suckers. So congratulations, you've created a monster. Now you get to live with him." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out if I was bluffing. But something in my expression must have convinced her that I wasn't, because she took a step back. "This isn't you, Marlow. This isn't who you are." "You're right. This is who you made me." After she left, I sat in my office and started planning my next move. If they wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty, and I had advantages they didn't know about. The first advantage was that I understood Ashwood in ways that Vanna and Rhett never had. They saw it as a small, backwards town full of simple people. But I knew it was actually a complex web of relationships, grudges, favors, and secrets that went back generations, and I knew how to pull the right strings to make things happen. The second advantage was that I'd been keeping my mouth shut about a lot of things over the years. Things I'd seen, things I'd heard, things I'd figured out. Ashwood might be small, but it was full of people with secrets they'd prefer to keep buried. The third advantage was that I'd underestimated myself for too long. I wasn't just some simple mechanic who got lucky in business. I was smart, I was resourceful, and when I put my mind to something, I got results. It was time to remind everyone of that fact. I started with Rhett's precious Mustang. I knew his schedule. He was a creature of habit. Always at the same coffee shop every morning at 8, always at the same bar every Thursday night. On Friday evening, while he was inside Jimmy's Tavern trying to charm some young waitress, I paid his car a little visit. I didn't do anything permanent or dangerous. I just loosened a few bolts here and there, disconnected a couple of wires, and left a small gift in his glove compartment, a wrench with Trasker's custom garage, engraved on the handle, along with a note that read, "Thought you might need this. Your loving brother." The next morning, Rhett's car wouldn't start. When he finally got it towed to a garage, not mine, obviously, they found the loosened bolts and the disconnected wires. Easy enough to fix, but embarrassing and expensive. And when they found the wrench and the note, well, that was just adding insult to injury. By Monday, everyone in town knew that I'd sabotaged my brother's car. The story grew in the telling, of course. Some people said I'd slashed his tires. Others claimed I'd poured sugar in his gas tank. A few creative souls insisted I'd somehow rigged the car to play Stand By Your Man every time he turned the key. None of it was true, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that people were talking, and they were starting to see me as something other than a victim. I was becoming the guy who fought back, the guy who didn't just roll over and take it when people tried to walk all over him. The second phase of my plan involved Vanna's professional reputation. She'd worked hard to build her image as a competent, trustworthy banking executive. She was proud of her MBA from State University, proud of her corner office, proud of the respect she'd earned in what was still largely a man's world. It would be a shame if people found out that her MBA wasn't exactly legitimate. See, I'd helped Vanna with her graduate school applications years ago, back when we were still partners and everything. I'd proofread her essays, helped her study for the entrance exams, and even written a few of her papers when she was too busy with work to handle the coursework herself. At the time, I thought I was being a supportive husband. Now I realized I'd been an accomplice to academic fraud. I still had copies of those papers, along with emails and documents that made it clear who had actually written them. I also had records of the online courses she'd taken to fulfill some of her degree requirements, courses that I'd completed for her while she was busy with other things, a few anonymous emails to the right people at State University, along with some carefully selected evidence, and Vanna's degree would be under investigation within a week. Even if she managed to keep the degree, the scandal would destroy her professional reputation. But I decided to save that ammunition for later. First, I wanted to have a little more fun. The Ashwood Founders Day Parade was coming up in 2 weeks, and as usual, the local business association was looking for volunteers to help with the organization. I'd been involved with the parade for years, helping to coordinate the classic car entries and occasionally serving as the master of ceremonies. This year, I volunteered to handle the public address system. The day of the parade was perfect, sunny and warm, with just enough breeze to keep the flags fluttering. Main Street was lined with families and folding chairs, and the high school marching band was warming up near the starting line. I set up the PA system on a small stage near the reviewing stand, testing the microphones and making sure everything was working properly. Vanna and Rhett were there, of course, sitting in the VIP section with the mayor and the other local dignitaries. They looked happy and relaxed, like a couple without a care in the world. Vanna was wearing a sundress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and Rhett was dressed in his usual preppy casual uniform of khakis and a polo shirt. The parade started at 10 o'clock sharp, with the usual procession of fire trucks, scout troops, and local politicians waving from convertibles. I provided commentary for each entry, keeping my voice professional and upbeat. Everything was going perfectly normally until the classic car section reached the reviewing stand. That's when I decided to share a little story with the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly over the cheers and applause. "As we watch these beautiful restored automobiles, I'm reminded of a conversation I overheard recently about the difference between things that look good on the surface and things that are actually built to last." I paused, letting the crowd settle down a bit. You see, some people think that if something looks shiny and new, it must be valuable. But those of us who work with our hands know that the real value is in the engine, in the foundation, in the parts you can't see from the outside. Another pause. I could see Vanna starting to look uncomfortable in the VIP section. For example, I recently learned that my wife has been telling people that she earned her MBA through hard work and dedication. But what she hasn't mentioned is that I wrote most of her papers and completed several of her online courses for her. Now, that doesn't necessarily make her degree worthless, but it does raise some interesting questions about authenticity, doesn't it? The crowd had gone completely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on Main Street. And then there's my brother Rhett, who's been telling people that he's a successful entrepreneur. What he hasn't mentioned is that he owes money to half the businesses in town, and that his most recent investment opportunity was actually a pyramid scheme that cost several local families their savings. I could see people in the crowd turning to look at the VIP section, where Vanna and Rhett were both trying to look invisible. But hey, I continued, we all make mistakes, right? The important thing is to learn from them and try to do better in the future. Speaking of which, I'd like to take this opportunity to announce that the Trasker Family Trust will be making a substantial donation to the Ashwood Youth Center to help local kids learn the value of hard work and honest dealing. The crowd started applauding, probably more out of confusion than enthusiasm. I handed the microphone back to the regular announcer and walked away from the stage, leaving Vanna and Rhett to deal with the stares and whispers. By that evening, my impromptu speech was all over social media. Someone had recorded it and posted it online, and it was being shared and commented on by people all over the county. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought I'd gone too far, while others applauded me for finally standing up for myself. But the most interesting reaction came from Cleo Rivington, who called me that night around 11 o'clock. "That was quite a performance today," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I thought so too. Did you enjoy the parade?" "You have no idea what you're messing with, Marlow. Vanna has worked too hard to let some bitter ex-husband destroy her career." "Ex-husband? We're not divorced yet, Cleo. Technically, I'm still her current husband." "Not for long. And when this is over, you're going to regret every petty, vindictive thing you've done." "You know what, Cleo? I don't think I will. For the first time in years, I'm actually enjoying myself." "Enjoy it while you can, because this isn't over. Not even close." She hung up before I could respond, but I wasn't worried. If Cleo was making threats, it meant I was getting under their skin. And if I was getting under their skin, it meant my plan was working. I poured myself a drink and sat on my back porch, looking out over the small yard that Vanna had always complained was too small, too ordinary, too working class for her taste. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the next phase of my campaign. There were still plenty of secrets to expose, plenty of scores to settle. After all, as I'd told Vanna, I wasn't the decent human being anymore. I was the monster they'd created, and monsters, as everyone knows, are very good at destroying the things that other people care about. The war was just getting started. 3 weeks after the parade incident, I was starting to understand why people become obsessed with revenge. It's not just about getting even, it's about the intoxicating feeling of having power over people who thought they were untouchable. Every day brought new opportunities to make Vanna and Rhett's lives a little more complicated, a little more embarrassing, a little more uncertain. The investigation into Vanna's degree had started, just as I'd predicted. State University took academic fraud seriously, especially when it involved someone in a prominent position in the financial industry. She'd been placed on administrative leave from the bank while they conducted their own internal review. Without her income, she'd had to move out of the expensive apartment she'd been renting and back into our house, a development that gave me no small amount of satisfaction. Rhett's situation was even worse. Word had gotten out about his debts and his involvement in that pyramid scheme, and suddenly nobody in town wanted to do business with him. His landlord had evicted him for non-payment of rent, and he was currently sleeping on the couch in our living room. The irony was delicious. The two lovebirds were stuck living under the same roof as the man they'd betrayed, and there wasn't a thing they could do about it. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Not even close. The final phase of my plan required getting all the major players in one place at the same time, away from witnesses and distractions. I needed somewhere private, somewhere I could control the environment and the narrative. That's when I remembered the old Riverside warehouse, a building I'd been thinking about buying for a possible expansion of my garage business. The warehouse had been empty for 5 years, ever since the textile company that owned it went out of business. It was a solid brick building with good bones, but it needed work. The electricity had been shut off, most of the windows were broken, and there was a persistent smell of mold and decay that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. It was perfect for my purposes. I spent a week preparing the space, bringing in some battery-powered lights, a folding table, and a few chairs. I also set up a small digital camera on a tripod, positioned to capture everything that happened in the main room. If I was going to destroy my family, I wanted to have a record of it. The hardest part was getting everyone to show up at the same time. I couldn't just invite them, they'd be suspicious, especially after everything that had happened. I needed to give them a reason to come, something they couldn't resist. The answer came to me during a conversation with my lawyer. Jim Morrison had been handling the divorce proceedings, and he'd mentioned that Vanna's attorney was pushing hard for information about the Trasker family trust. Apparently, she still thought she might be able to get her hands on some of that money, despite what I'd told her. That gave me an idea. I sent each of them a text message from a burner phone, claiming to be from a private investigator who had information about hidden assets related to the trust fund. The messages were vague but tantalizing, suggesting that there were documents hidden in the old warehouse that could change the outcome of the divorce proceedings. I told them to meet at the warehouse at 8 o'clock on Friday night and to come alone. It was a long shot, but I knew these people well enough to predict their reactions. Vanna would be curious about anything involving money. Rhett would be desperate enough to chase any lead that might improve his situation, and Darla would probably show up just to see what kind of drama was about to unfold. Friday night came, and I arrived at the warehouse at 7:30 to make final preparations. I'd brought a cooler with some drinks and sandwiches. If this was going to be a long night, I wanted to be comfortable. I also brought a baseball bat, not because I planned to hurt anyone, but because sometimes the threat of violence is more effective than violence itself. Vanna arrived first, at exactly 8 o'clock. She was dressed in jeans and a sweater, practical clothes that suggested she was taking this seriously. She looked around the empty warehouse with obvious distaste, wrinkling her nose at the smell and the general decay. "Hello, Vanna," I said, stepping out of the shadows near the back of the room. She spun around, her eyes wide with surprise and growing alarm. "Marlow? What are you doing here? Where's the private investigator?" "There is no private investigator. Just me and some things we need to discuss." She started backing toward the door, but it swung open before she could reach it. Rhett walked in, looking around nervously. He was followed a few seconds later by Darla, who had her phone in her hand and was probably already composing her next social media post about her crazy family. Well, I said, walking over to flip on the battery-powered lights. "Look what we have here, the whole gang, together at last." "Dad, what is this?" Darla demanded. "Some kind of intervention? Because if you think you can manipulate us into—" "Shut up, Darla." The words came out harder than I'd intended, but they had the desired effect. She actually closed her mouth and took a step back. "Now then," I continued, "I know you're all wondering why I asked you here tonight. The truth is, we have some unfinished business to discuss, and I thought it would be better to handle it privately, away from the gossips and the social media vultures." "You're scaring me, Marlow," Vanna said. "This isn't like you." "You're right. The old Marlow would have just rolled over and let you walk all over him. But the old Marlow is gone, thanks to all of you. What you're looking at now is what you created." I walked over to the folding table and picked up a manila folder I'd prepared earlier. It was thick with documents, photographs, and printouts. Evidence of every lie, every betrayal, every secret I'd uncovered over the past few weeks. "Let's start with you, Vanna," I said, opening the folder. "Tell everyone here about your MBA. Tell them how you earned it." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Tell them about the papers I wrote for you. Tell them about the online courses I completed while you were busy climbing the corporate ladder. Tell them about the fake transcripts and the forged recommendation letters." Her face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "You can't prove any of that." I pulled out a stack of papers and held them up. "Actually, I can. I kept copies of everything, Vanna. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that shows what really happened. The university investigators are very interested in this material." I turned to Rhett, who was trying to edge toward the door. "And you, little brother. Tell everyone about your business ventures. Tell them about the people you've cheated, the money you've stolen, the lies you've told to cover up your failures." "I never stole anything." "Really? What about the Henderson family? You convinced them to invest their retirement savings in your cryptocurrency scheme, remember? The one that turned out to be completely fraudulent? They lost everything because of you." Rhett's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That wasn't my fault. The market crashed, and—" "The market crashed because there was no market, Rhett. You made the whole thing up. You took their money and spent it on clothes and cars and fancy dinners, and when it came time to pay them back, you disappeared." Finally, I turned to Darla, who was holding her phone like a shield. "And you, my dear daughter, tell everyone about your college experience. Tell them about the cheating, the drinking, the complete waste of the education I was paying for." "I don't have to listen to this," she said, but her voice was shaking. "Actually, you do, because you're about to learn what happens when you betray the people who love you." I walked over to the camera I'd set up and pressed the record button. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the camera, "my name is Marlow Trasker, and I want to tell you a story about what happens when good people get pushed too far." For the next hour, I laid out everything. Every detail of their betrayals, every lie they'd told, every way they'd tried to manipulate and deceive me. I showed documents, read emails, and played recorded conversations. I exposed Vanna's academic fraud, Rhett's financial crimes, and Darla's complete lack of gratitude or respect for the family that had given her everything. They tried to interrupt, tried to defend themselves, tried to leave. But I'd locked the door from the inside, and I had the only key. They were trapped, forced to listen as I systematically destroyed their reputations and their futures. The beautiful thing about the internet, I said as I wrapped up my presentation, is that once something gets posted online, it never really goes away. This video will be shared and copied and discussed for years to come. Every time someone searches your names, this is what they'll find. You can't do this, Vanna whispered. It's illegal. It's kidnapping. It's justice, I said. For 20 years, I played by the rules. I was honest, I was faithful, I was supportive. And where did it get me? You cheated on me with my own brother, stole my money, and turned my daughter against me. Well, congratulations. You've created a monster. Now you get to live with the consequences. I walked over to the door and unlocked it. You're free to go, I said. But remember, this is just the beginning. I have enough evidence to destroy all of you, and I'm not afraid to use it. Cross me again, and I'll make what happened tonight look like a friendly conversation. They fled like rats from a sinking ship, stumbling over each other in their haste to get away from me. Darla was crying, Vanna was shaking, and Rhett looked like he was about to be sick. I stood alone in that empty warehouse, surrounded by the smell of decay and the echoes of 20 years of marriage crashing down around me. I should have felt guilty, or sad, or something resembling human emotion. Instead, I felt free. The video was online within an hour, posted to every social media platform I could think of. By morning, it had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Some people were horrified by what I'd done, calling me a monster and a psychopath. Others applauded me for finally standing up to the people who had wronged me. But their opinions didn't matter anymore. I'd crossed a line that night in the warehouse, and there was no going back. I'd become exactly what they'd accused me of being, a villain, a monster, a man with nothing left to lose. And you know what? It felt pretty good. The war was almost over. There was just one more battle left to fight. The Ashwood Summer Block Party was always the biggest event of the year in our little town. Main Street would be closed to traffic, local businesses would set up booths selling everything from funnel cakes to handmade crafts, and the whole community would come together for one night of music, food, and small-town fellowship. It was the kind of wholesome Norman Rockwell event that made people feel good about living in a place like Ashwood. This year, I decided to make it memorable for entirely different reasons. The warehouse video had been online for 2 weeks, and the fallout had been spectacular. Vanna had been fired from the bank and was facing possible criminal charges for fraud. Rhett had fled town in the middle of the night, leaving behind a trail of angry creditors and a storage unit full of worthless possessions. Darla had dropped out of college and was living with her grandparents, too ashamed to show her face in public. But I wasn't done yet. Not quite. The block party was scheduled for the Saturday night before Labor Day, and as usual, there would be a small stage set up in front of the courthouse for local musicians and speakers. The mayor would give his annual State of the City address, the high school principal would announce the upcoming football season, and various community leaders would take turns thanking volunteers and promoting local causes. I'd volunteered to help with the sound system, just like I'd done for the Founders' Day parade. Amazing how people still trusted me with important responsibilities, even after everything that had happened. I guess they figured that a man who could fix a classic car engine could certainly handle a few microphones and speakers. The day of the block party was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the smell of grilled onions and cotton candy through the evening air. Families were spread out on blankets and lawn chairs, kids were running around with glow sticks and balloons, and teenagers were clustering around the game booths trying to impress each other with their skill at ring toss and basketball shooting. I spent the afternoon setting up the PA system, testing microphones and adjusting speaker levels. Everything was working perfectly, just the way I'd planned. I'd also made a few modifications to the system, nothing illegal or dangerous, just some additional inputs that would allow me to override the regular programming if necessary. Around 7 o'clock, just as the sun was starting to set and the string lights were beginning to twinkle, I saw Vanna arrive at the block party. She was alone, walking slowly through the crowd with her head down, trying not to attract attention. She looked older than she had just a few months ago, worn down by the stress and humiliation of the past few weeks. Part of me, a very small part, felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the look on her face when she danced with Rhett at our anniversary party, and the sympathy evaporated like steam from a radiator. The official program started at 8 o'clock, with Mayor Patterson welcoming everyone and thanking the various sponsors and volunteers. He was followed by the police chief, who gave a brief safety reminder about fireworks and traffic. Then came the high school principal, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and a few other local dignitaries. I waited patiently, monitoring the sound levels and making sure everything was running smoothly. I was the helpful volunteer, the reliable community member, the guy you could count on to make sure the technical side of things worked properly. At 9 o'clock, Mayor Patterson took the microphone again to introduce the evening's final speaker, a representative from the Historical Society who was going to talk about Ashwood's founding families and their contributions to the community. That's when I made my move. I walked over to the main soundboard and quietly disconnected the regular microphone feed. Then I plugged in my own microphone, a wireless unit that I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket all evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice booming out over the crowd through the PA system, "I hope you're all having a wonderful time at this year's block party." People looked around, confused. They could hear my voice, but they couldn't see me at the sound booth in the dark area behind the stage. "My name is Marlow Trasker," I continued, "and I have a story I'd like to share with you tonight. It's a story about family and loyalty and what happens when people forget the difference between right and wrong." I could see Mayor Patterson frantically gesturing to someone, probably trying to figure out what was happening, but I'd locked the sound booth door from the inside, and I had the only key. "6 months ago," I said, stepping into the light so people could see me, "I thought I had a pretty good life. I had a successful business, a beautiful wife, and a daughter I was proud of. I thought I understood the people closest to me, and I thought they understood me." The crowd was completely silent now. Hundreds of people standing in the street, looking up at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to alarm. But I was wrong about a lot of things. I was wrong about my wife, who had been stealing money from our joint accounts and planning to leave me for my own brother. I was wrong about my daughter, who was so embarrassed by her working-class father that she made fun of me on social media for thousands of strangers to see. And I was wrong about my brother, who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to getting what he wanted. I could see Vanna in the crowd now, her face pale with horror. She was trying to push through the people around her, probably heading for her car. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking," I continued. "You're thinking this is just another sad story about a marriage gone wrong, another middle-aged man who couldn't handle his wife leaving him for someone younger and more exciting, and maybe you're right. Maybe I should have just accepted it, signed the divorce papers, and moved on with my life." I paused, letting the silence stretch out over the crowd. But here's the thing about being pushed too far. Eventually you push back, and when a man like me pushes back, well, things tend to get interesting. For the next 20 minutes, I told them everything. I told them about the anniversary party, about the warehouse confrontation, about every lie and betrayal and manipulation I'd uncovered. I showed them documents on a large screen I'd set up behind the stage, played audio recordings through the PA system, and laid out the whole sordid story in excruciating detail. I told them about Vanna's fake degree and her embezzlement from the bank. I told them about Rhett's pyramid schemes and his pattern of cheating local investors. I told them about Darla's complete lack of gratitude for everything her family had given her. But most importantly, I told them about what I'd learned about myself, about how being the good guy, the decent man, the reliable provider had gotten me nothing but betrayal and humiliation, about how I'd finally stopped caring what people thought of me and started focusing on what I thought of them. "You see," I said as I began to wrap up my speech, "for most of my life, I've been afraid of being the bad guy. I've been afraid of hurting people's feelings, afraid of causing drama, afraid of being seen as anything other than a nice, harmless man who fixed cars and minded his own business." I looked out over the crowd, seeing faces I'd known for decades, people who'd brought their cars to my garage, people who'd shared drinks with me at local bars, people who'd watched me grow up and get married and build a life in this town. But you know what I've learned? Being the bad guy has its advantages. When you're the bad guy, people leave you alone. When you're the bad guy, people think twice before they try to cheat you or lie to you or take advantage of your good nature. When you're the bad guy, you get to sleep at night knowing that anyone who crosses you is going to pay for it. I held up a thick manila envelope, the same one I'd used at the warehouse. "I have enough evidence in here to destroy what's left of my wife's reputation, to put my brother in prison, and to make sure my daughter never gets another job or college admission in her life. I could ruin them completely, and they know it. They have to live with that knowledge every single day, wondering when I'm going to decide they need another lesson in consequences." The crowd was completely silent now. Even the children had stopped running around and were staring up at me with wide eyes. "So, here's what I want you all to remember," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the warm night air. "Marlow Trasker is not a victim anymore. Marlow Trasker is not a nice guy anymore. Marlow Trasker is the man you don't want to cross, the man you don't want to lie to, the man you don't want to underestimate." I looked directly into the crowd, finding Vanna's face among the sea of shocked expressions. "And if anyone in this town thinks they can treat me the way my family treated me, well, just ask them how that worked out." I set the microphone down on the soundboard and walked away from the stage, leaving behind a crowd of hundreds of people who were too stunned to speak. As I made my way through the silent mass of bodies, people stepped aside to let me pass, like I was carrying some kind of contagious disease. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely at peace with who I was and what I'd become. I'd started this journey as a victim, a man who'd been betrayed and humiliated by the people he trusted most. I was ending it as something else entirely, a force to be reckoned with, a man who'd learned that sometimes the only way to get respect is to make people afraid of what happens when they don't give it to you. I walked home through the quiet streets of Ashwood, past the houses where families were probably already discussing what they'd just witnessed, past the businesses where I'd been a customer for decades, past the landmarks of a life I'd thought I understood. Behind me, I could hear the crowd finally starting to buzz with conversation, hundreds of voices trying to process what had just happened. By tomorrow, the story would be all over social media. By next week, it would probably make the regional news. Marlow Trasker, the mild-mannered mechanic who'd snapped and declared war on his own family in front of the entire town, let them talk, let them judge, let them whisper and point and shake their heads in disapproval. I'd spent 45 years caring what other people thought of me and where had it gotten me. A cheating wife, an ungrateful daughter, and a brother who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. Now I was free of all that, free of their expectations, free of their judgments, free of their needs and demands and constant disappointments. I was finally completely, authentically myself. And if that self happened to be the villain in their story, well, that was their problem, not mine. I unlocked the front door of my house now, since Vanna had moved out after the warehouse incident, and stepped inside. The silence was profound, but it wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. I poured myself a drink and sat in my favorite chair, looking around at the home I'd worked so hard to build and maintain. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the garage and work on the cars that people brought me to fix. I'd do good work, charge fair prices, and treat my customers with respect. But I'd never again be the man who could be taken advantage of, who could be lied to and cheated and betrayed without consequences. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone colder, someone who understood that in this world, you're either the hammer or the nail. I'd chosen to be the hammer. And in Ashwood, New York, everyone would remember that choice for a very long time. The war was over. I'd won. And the victory tasted exactly like I'd thought it would, bitter, satisfying, and absolutely final.